The Star of Bethlehem first occurred on August 26 of 2 BC. I invite you to look at my other video that explains this topic further and explains how the Star of Bethlehem appeared and how Bible prophecy relates to it. So I'm going to go over in this video just some very quick summary of it so I can get on to other parts of the video rather quickly. But first of all, we have a prophecy given in the Old Testament in Numbers chapter 24 that says a star will rise out of Jacob. And here we have a star rising out of where Orion grabs the heel of the Gemini twins, representing Jacob and Esau. And Jacob means in Hebrew the one who grabs the heel, because he was grabbing the heel of his brother at the time of his birth. So a star is rising out of Jacob, and a scepter is rising out of Israel. And we have a rare conjunction of 4 planets that form a scepter, or a ruler's staff, and it rises on the horizon out of Israel to strike the corners of Moab. Again, this is what the sky looks like from Jerusalem in 2 BC. So the corner of Moab on the horizon would have been in this section of the east, and I'll show you that on a map. Here's a map of ancient Israel, and if you're standing in Jerusalem looking east, you'll notice that the corner section here for the kingdom of Moab is what you would be seeing on the eastern horizon. So again, going back to our astronomy software, we see that the scepter is rising on the horizon, striking the corner of Moab. So we have a fulfillment of this prophecy of a star rising out of Jacob and a scepter rising out of Israel to strike the corner of Moab. And it says that it will also kill all the children of Sheth. And so what happened was, when the wise men first learned about the Star of Bethlehem, they traveled to Jerusalem about 2 years later in order to worship the newly born Messiah. The king at the time, King Herod, was not very happy when he heard this news because he realized it was a threat to his royal throne. And so he concocted a plan to have the Messiah killed. And so he told the wise men to report back to him once the baby Jesus was found, because Herod intended actually to kill him. However, the wise men were warned in a dream not to report back to Herod, so they went another way. And Herod was very angry, and he sent troops out to basically try to kill baby Jesus. However, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus had fled to Egypt at this point. So Herod had all the children that were aged 2 years old and younger in the town of Bethlehem and the surrounding areas killed in order to prevent the baby Jesus, the Messiah, from claiming the throne. Now, the reason why Herod had killed all those children that were 2 years old and younger is because the Bible says that the wise men had told him that it was, according to the first time that they saw the star, was 2 years earlier. So we have 2 occurrences of the Star of Bethlehem. The first time is 2 years before the events we just described, where Herod killed all the children, 2 years old and younger. And the second time was in 1 AD, 2 years later. So we know this from the Bible, that because the wise men said that when they were traveling to Bethlehem, that they saw the star a second time, and this was 2 years after the fact. So that's why this prophecy says that they will kill all the children of Sheth, because Sheth means in place of or in substitution of. In other words, all those children died in place of the Messiah because King Herod was trying to kill the Messiah. So I'll read the prophecy again just so you can kind of see it clearly and understand it clearly. It's in the book of Numbers, chapter 24, verse 17. It says, I shall see him now, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh, because the prophet is speaking 1400 years before it happens. There shall come a star out of Jacob. So here we have the star out of Jacob. And a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Here's the scepter rising out of Israel just before dawn. And shall smite the corners of Moab. It's hitting the corner of Moab on the horizon. And shall kill or shall destroy all the children of Sheth. And the result of this whole Star of Bethlehem episode was the death of the children of 2 years old and younger around Bethlehem at the hands of evil King Herod. So here is a perfect fulfillment of this prophecy. Now let's take a look at the second appearance of the Star of Bethlehem 2 years later that the wise men saw. Now, as the wise men would have been traveling towards Jerusalem, heading south, the star that was before in Jacob, or where Orion reaches up to grab the heel of Jacob, has now moved over on the horizon, on the skyline a little bit, but now it's directly over where Bethlehem would have been if one is looking south from Jerusalem. So the star is now directly over the location where they're traveling to. But in addition to that, the road to Bethlehem actually passes by Bethlehem on the western side. So as they are traveling to Bethlehem and the road gets into the area of Bethlehem, they would look to the east and they would have seen this same conjunction of 4 planets, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and Jupiter, which again is extremely rare, in conjunction with all the other items that I mentioned, that this conjunction of stars is now rising over the horizon and would have risen exactly where they would have seen the location of Jesus as they're passing by Bethlehem on the road. And so this would have risen over the horizon and stopped basically right over where the house would have been. It would have disappeared just as the sun rises up after it, because the stars disappear as it gets light. So the conjunction appears and then stops appearing right over where Jesus was residing. And Jesus is about 2 years old at this point. He's still a toddler, but this is 2 years after his birth. What's interesting is that this conjunction forms a cross. And I'll show you that now. So here we have these 2 stars here, and then we have Venus and Jupiter, and it makes a cross. And so the cross would have been appearing as it rose up on the horizon, this scepter. But in addition to that, the constellation that this cross is located in is the constellation Libra, which in and of itself is a cross. So we have a cross of stars against the cross that is formed by the constellation of Libra, and this cross representing judgment. And so here we have a perfect sign of the coming Messiah, the coming of Jesus Christ, in representation of the judgment that he took, the punishment he took upon the cross. And so there's no question in my mind that this is exactly what these prophecies are referring to, and they foretell or foreshadow the coming of the Messiah. Now, if we move ahead 6 more days, we see something else very amazing. We see that the planets in question, have now formed a different type of pattern offset against the constellation of Libra. And it almost looks like a stream of water or something trickling out of the side of the cross of Libra. And the first star in question is Mars, the red one, which in Hebrew is Ma'adim, which is it means the red one, or blood, because the word dam in Hebrew means blood. And so that's where you get Adam or Edom, which means red. And so we have the red pierced side of the Messiah on the cross, with the stream of water and blood flowing out of his side. And so this is exactly what is depicted in the stars at the time of the second appearance of the Star of Bethlehem. And so the cross again, this cross of Libra, represents judgment. Now, we recall that the first occurrence of the Star of Bethlehem is when the wise men saw the star, and then they traveled to Jerusalem in order to find the Messiah. The second occurrence is when they saw the scepter on the road, indicating where Jesus was located. However, they had to flee very quickly, and within a few days, Herod went and slaughtered all the children that were 2 years old and younger. So those children were a sacrifice in place of Jesus, because Herod was killing them in place of Jesus. So this, in a way, can also possibly represent the time that the sacrifice occurred, in which those children died in place of Jesus, and because of at the hands of wicked Herod, who perpetrated that evil. And this is prophetic again, because it tells about the account in the Bible where Jesus' side was pierced when he was on the cross, and out of his side flowed blood and water. Now, the prophecy that I read earlier about the star rising out of Jacob would have been the prophecy that would have prompted the wise men to go try to find the Messiah in the first place, because they would have been aware of that prophecy, and once they saw this star appear in the constellations, they realized it was the fulfillment of that prophecy. That prophecy occurs in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, but it was written about 1,400 years roughly before the event occurred. And we have copies of that prophecy that are older than the actual Star of Bethlehem because they were discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we know that this prophecy was given in advance of the star occurring. Now, what I'm going to look at now is another prophecy in the Bible that relates to the Star of Bethlehem that was also written well in advance out of the book of Genesis. And we also have copies of this dating to prior to the event occurring because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, going back again to 2 BC, and the reason why this says -1 is because the astronomy software that I'm using has a year 0 in it, and it doesn't adjust for that, so -1 is actually -2, because there is no year 0 in history. So in 2 BC, on August 26, we see our scepter again appearing on the horizon, but we'll notice that this conjunction of 4 stars is occurring in the constellation of Leo, and Leo is the constellation of the lion. So I'm going to look at a prophecy now from Genesis chapter 49, where Jacob is about to pass away, and he's going to give some prophecies over his 12 children. And when he gets to Judah, his 4th child, he has the following prophecy, and Judah is the child from which Jesus would descend. Jesus would come through the line of Judah. And it reads as follows: Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? So a lion's whelp is the young lion, as we see here, crouched down for the prey, and then we have the old lion here. This is the famous Lion of Judah, because it's believed that Judah was born under the sign of Leo, the lion. So then as we continue on here, the next verse says, in verse 10 of Genesis chapter 49, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So here we see the scepter again on the horizon, okay, and it says that a scepter shall not depart from Judah. So right now this scepter is in the constellation of Judah. But if we move forward in time, what we'll see is that within 1 day's time, if we move forward 1 day, the stars in the scepter are starting to break apart. They're almost entering into the next constellation, which is Virgo, but they haven't quite departed the constellation of Judah yet. So the scepter shall not depart from Judah, and it also says that nor a lawgiver from between his feet. So here, now on August 27th, we see that the moon has moved into the feet of the lion being Judah. And we know from the Bible that the moon is indeed a form of a lawgiver, and I'll read why in Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, in verse 16, which is day 4 of creation, we read, And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also. The lesser light that's being referred to is the moon. The greater light is the sun. But its job is to rule, or to establish laws and statutes and basically govern, like a king, over the night. So here is the lawgiver, the moon, which is between the feet of Judah. And the moon passes very quickly through the sky, so it's a short period of time before this moon will be in and out of the feet of Judah. So again, going back to our original prophecy, a scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. And Shiloh means peace or tranquility. So what we see, this is all occurring just at the time of sunrise on August 27th. Okay? So what we see is that as the sun is rising, the moon and the scepter are still in Judah, but they're on their way out. This sign is basically starting to go away. And so it says, this sign will not disappear until peace and tranquility comes. So what happened was, Mary obviously has gone into labor starting on the 26th or so, and overnight, or even on the 27th, she's in the process of giving birth to the baby Jesus. And she goes through the pains of labor, but before this sign disappears, she will give birth, and peace and tranquility will come. Her labor pains will cease. So the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the lawgiver from between the feet of the lion, until Shiloh, or peace or tranquility, should come. The end of her labor pains should come, and the baby Jesus is born. So from that, we know that Jesus was born around the time of dawn on August 27th of 2 BC. So therefore, This is what we should be celebrating for Christmas if we're going to celebrate Christmas. Obviously, December 25th is not the correct date. Jesus was actually born on August 27th of 2 BC. But in addition to that, there are still other prophecies in the Bible that confirm this as well, and I'll show you those. Before I go and show you those other prophecies, though, however, I first want to finish the verses in Genesis chapter 49. So let's review this again. Starting in verse 9, it reads, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. And stooped down, he crouched as a lion, as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So it's unto Jesus that all the people shall be gathered to. All the people should be called and gathered to Jesus Christ, the gospel going forth out into the world, gathering all people to him. In verse 11 we continue, binding his foal unto a vine, and his ass's colt unto a choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. So Jesus, when he entered Jerusalem, entered riding a ass's colt and a foal, and this is described in the Gospels. And so they reference this prophecy as Jesus enters into Jerusalem. They say that it is in the Gospels, it's the fulfillment of this prophecy. And he's going into Jerusalem during his week, the Passion Week, as he's progressing towards the culmination of that week where he's crucified on the cross. And the verses continue to say, and he washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. So this is talking about his death on the cross, the fact that his clothes were covered in blood from his death on the cross. And it says that his eyes shall be red with wine and his teeth white with milk. And I kind of take that to mean, although that's rather ambiguous, I kind of take that to mean that his eyes are red with wine because he's a man acquainted with sorrow and pain and suffering. And so you think of like bloodshot eyes and so forth from that. But white as milk because even despite all that, even despite his suffering, he still had a smile and he still showed nothing but love and care for people. So that's kind of how I read that prophecy. But again, you can see this prophecy, this perfectly relates to the Star of Bethlehem and is a second confirmation that this is in fact the time of his birth. So now let's take a look at some prophecies in the book of Revelation. Now, notice again, we're talking about 2 BC. On August 27th is actually the birth date for Jesus. In Revelation chapter 12, we read the following verses. And there appeared a great wonder in the heaven, a woman, in this case the constellation Virgo, clothed with the sun, so the sun is in Virgo, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon was under her feet, and upon her head was a crown of 12 stars. Now, Jesus was born on August 27th. However, it's the custom in Judaism to circumcise the child on the 8th day. They wait till the 8th day because in ancient times, there's a lot of times where basically there's a lot of early childbirth, death, and so forth. And so if a child made it 8 days, that was a pretty good sign that the child was going to live and continue and grow on. So circumcision occurs on the 8th day. In addition to that, that's the day that God prescribed that circumcision should occur when he gave circumcision to Abraham in order to pass on to all of his offspring. So if we go forward, considering this is the first day, let's go forward to the 8th day. So this is the first day. We got 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. So the 8th day is the 3rd of September. Okay? And so we have the moon in Libra, which is the constellation at her feet. And in near her head, we have 3 stars, Venus, Jupiter, and Mars, which combine with the normal 9 stars that make up Leo. So you have a total of 12 stars on her head, a crown of 12 stars. So she has a crown of 12 stars, the moon is at her feet, and she's clothed with the sun. And it says, and she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. Again, this sign is all taking place at the time of her birth and the circumcision, and at the time of the birth of Jesus. So this whole sign appears at this time. So it says, she being with child cried, travailing and pained to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. And so here we see, just below the constellation Virgo, is a great serpent, the constellation Orpheus. So I've added the other stars and the different connections for the constellations so we can see this a little bit clearer. But what we see is that we have a serpent here, the head of the serpent, and on his head is a crown of 7 stars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there is a crown of 7 stars upon his head. Now, some people connect the constellations a little bit differently throughout history, but generally it's believed that the head of the serpent here has 7 stars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Some programs show it a little bit differently, but going back to our verses again, it says, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, the woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and she being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon its heads. Now what we're going to find is that there's actually a story from Revelation being written in the stars about the birth of Jesus. So I'm going to go ahead and back this up to the 27th, the day he was born. Actually the 26th. And what we notice is that when we start out with the Star of Bethlehem, we notice that Mars is actually hidden within the scepter. But as the birth process continues, Jesus is born on the next day, the 27th, we notice that Mars emerges and he appears, and Mars is the red planet. And so we have the appearance of, this is analogous to the red serpent, okay? Venus, however, is known in Hebrew as the Queen of Heaven. It's the female planet. It's Kochavet. So, and in ancient times, it's known as the Queen of Heaven, and it's given different names in different pagan cultures as an idol, Ishtar and Ashtaroth and so forth, but it's all a female deity or star, basically, and it means the Queen of Heaven. So, what we have here is Venus representing the woman who's giving birth, and then the Mars, the red planet, representing the red serpent, and we're going to watch this story unfold. So getting back to our verses, we again in verse 3 of Revelation chapter 12, it says, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon its heads, and his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And so this is referring to the tail of the serpent, which is entering into the Milky Way, where a third part of the stars of heaven are located, so to speak. So his tail is drawing a third part of the stars of heaven, and he's casting them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So here we have the dragon, the serpent, standing before the woman as she is giving birth to devour her child. And again, we also have, in this situation, we have the red planet Mars standing in the scepter, waiting for her child to be born. And the child, the male planet in Hebrew is Kochav, which is Mercury, which represents the male planet, versus Venus is Kochavet, which represents the female planet. So Mercury, the male child, is being born, and the red serpent is standing there waiting for the child to be born. Now, continuing on, it says that the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And in verse 5 it says, and she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go forward in time here, and what we watch is, as we progress towards towards the time of circumcision for Jesus, the Mercury is passing into the area of the womb of Virgo the Virgin, and as the story continues along here, Mercury is it passes by the sun where it disappears, and then it reemerges again around the area where the exit of the womb would be, and at this location is the constellation Bootes, which is the male child with the rod of iron, who is going to rule the nations with the rod of iron, just like the verses say. So, continuing on here, it says, she brought forth a male child who was to rule all nations with the rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So this is very interesting. So, as we continue down here, we can see that Mercury is continuing to progress forward through the birth process. But when we get to the point of the cross that's found in Libra, okay, what happens is, at this moment that Mercury, the male child, is entering upon the cross, is the very first day of the month, because on the Hebrew calendar, the first day of the month is established when the moon passes by the sun and is first visible, according to two witnesses. So their months go by the moon. They don't go on a written calendar like Western culture does, according to the Roman tradition. And so in ancient times, this would have been the first day of the month, as the moon is passing by the sun. And as the moon is passing by the sun at this moment, Mercury is entering into the cross. And so this particular day in history, in 2 BC, would have been the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, which is the start of their new year. Okay? And so this period is known as the 10 days of awe. It's the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah leading up to the Day of Atonement, which is Judgment Day in Hebrew, because every year they have a Judgment Day for all the acts that they've done in the year, and to pronounce basically either blessings or cursings over the nation's lives, over people's lives, and so forth, from the throne in heaven, from God's throne in heaven for the following year. And so this is when God sits upon his throne and passes judgment. And so we have, at this moment on Rosh Hashanah, the 10 days of awe, that are the days of judgment, leading up to the Day of Atonement, which is the final proclamation, the passing of sentence from the throne of God. So on Rosh Hashanah, Mercury, which is representing the male child that's born from the Virgin, is entering into the cross. And we'll see that he spends 10 days during the days of awe in the constellation of Libra, which represents judgment on the cross. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so 10 days in the constellation of judgment, representing God sitting on his throne, passing judgment. So going back to our verses again, it says, she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared for her of God, that they should feed her there for 1,260 days. So the child was caught up to God and to his throne. Okay, so this is about his crucifixion. He went to the cross, he went through judgment, and then he rose from the dead and ascended into heaven after the cross and to the throne of God. And this judgment represents the judgment throne of God. Now here's what's really amazing. If we go all the way back to the birth here, we'll go back to August 27th, okay? So here's August 26th, here's August 27th. Now, this is August 27th. We are going to count forward from his birth until the point in time where Mercury enters into the cross. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. So the 33rd day is Rosh Hashanah. It's the start of the new year. It's when the 10 days of awe start, and when Mercury, representing the male child, representing Jesus, is on the cross. So from the time of his birth until the time that he's on the cross is 33 days, representing the 33 years of his life from the time he's born until he goes on the cross at Calvary. So the number of days given for this constellation to play out give the exact number of years of his life. So the whole story of the gospel is written in the stars. It's amazing, but it's written in the stars, and it's confirmed in the scriptures in the book of Revelation. So what we also see is it says that in verse 6, it says, the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,203 score days, 1,260 days. So let's back up again to the time of the birth. Okay, so we'll go back to August 27th here. And as we go back to the date of Jesus' birth on August 27th, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to count the number of days that Venus spends before it goes into the constellation of Virgo. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hang on a second here. Let me adjust the screen. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. So what we saw was Venus was turning around or fleeing and spends 40 days until it comes to her place in the wilderness, in the constellation, in the zodiac. Okay, so the 40 days, if you remember, Israel in ancient times spent 40 days wandering in the wilderness, right? And so there again, in verse 6 we have, and the woman fled to her place in the wilderness, where she hath a place for God, where they should feed her for 1,203 score days. So the 40-day fleeing here represents the 40 days in the wilderness, and then we have her place that she finally comes to. And we also recall that at the time of Jesus' birth, that when the wise men came at the second appearance of the Star of Bethlehem, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus did have to flee into Egypt for a period of time until Herod died. And then after Herod died, then they were safe to return back to Jerusalem again. So as we continue on here, it says in verse 7 that there was a war in heaven, and Michael, and the name Michael means one who is like God. It's like the angel of the Lord. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. So if we look down in our constellations here in the zodiac, after we're continuing on here with Mercury now, coming past the throne of judgment. Okay, so he's gone through the days of Oz, gone through judgment, and then what happens is he goes through this section of the sky here, which Scorpio representing the sting of death after the cross, okay? And he turns around, he goes into death, and then he turns around, Mercury does here, and he ascends back towards the throne of judgment, the throne of God, right? And so he ascends up then, and he disappears as he passes by the sun, and then he reappears as he ascends to the throne of heaven, okay? And so he spends about 3 days disappearing behind the sun before he reappears again and ascends into a heaven towards the throne of God. So this is analogous of Jesus dying, being buried, spending 3 days in the grave, 3 days and 3 nights, and then ascending again into heaven to the throne of God. And it says in verse 7, and there was a war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. So what we notice is that when Jesus ascends to the throne, at the pinnacle of the throne of God, at the very height, at the very top now, Mars has entered in at the pinnacle. So Mars was trying to ascend into heaven, representing the red dragon, that's trying to ascend into the heights of heaven to be like God, to be like the Most High. Yet there's going to be a war, and Mars is going to be cast out of heaven. Mars representing the red serpent, okay? So when we look on our constellations, what we see here is all kinds of constellations that happen to do with a man wrestling with a serpent. Here's a man wrestling with a serpent. Here's the great red dragon, okay? Here's a man with a spear, pointing towards the serpent in heaven and so forth. So we have what we see right after death here is a depiction of the war in heaven, of Jesus fighting against, and the archangel Michael, rather, which is his angel, the angel of the Lord, fighting against the serpent. And that's not to say Jesus is Michael. Those are two different things, because Michael is a created being. So I just want to make that distinction. But that's the angel of the Lord, and the angel that represents and protects and watches over the nation of Israel. So we now have this period of this war in heaven, and we're going to see that the serpent gets cast out of heaven as we move forward here. So we'll go ahead a few more days here, okay, and we'll see that the serpent now is thrown out of heaven. He's being cast down into the earth, okay. So this again is following the verses perfectly. I also want to show you something else real quick here. From the 10 days of awe to the day of judgment, Yom Kippur. Okay, so now if we go from those days, okay, and we go forward 40 days, that's the 40-day time frame is the amount of time, and I won't count them all off because for the sake of time here, but it's the amount of time it takes for Mercury to go through the cycle and then to ascend back to the throne of heaven. So Jesus, after his death in resurrection, spent 40 days with his disciples before he ascended into heaven. So there again, we have another representation here of what is told in the Gospels. Okay. So continuing on here, verse 7 says, "There was a war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil, and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." So what we see here again is Mars, representing the serpent, being cast out from the pinnacle of heaven. So as we continue on here, we see now that Mars is being cast out, and as he's cast out, it says, I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, "Now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe unto the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he has but a short time. And when the dragon saw he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman who brought forth the man-child." So then we see the Eve now, not Eve rather, but the woman who gave birth to Jesus here, which represent Mary or represent the church. It can represent Eve too, because Eve is the mother of all the living, or represent Israel. So she is passing by Venus here, the queen of heaven, so to speak, is passing by Mars. And as it continues on here, now, as at this point in our story, now Mars is in pursuit of persecuting the woman. He's following after the woman, okay? So it says, "And when the dragon saw he was cast into earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child." And so what we notice here is that at the point that the woman is passing by, Venus is passing by Mars here, is the point which he's cast from the pinnacle of Libra, from the heavens, down to the pedestal, to the earth. And that's when the woman passes by, and that's when he starts pursuing the woman, because he's cast into the earth. Okay? And it says, "And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman who brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness unto her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times and half a time from the face of the serpent." So then what we see here is, as we continue on with our story, the next, as she passes by the area where the serpent, the persecution, the sting of death and so forth, and the war in heaven, the next thing in the story is Venus entering into the area of the wings of the great eagle. Okay? And so we just read that the women were given 2 wings of a great eagle, where she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she's nourished for times, and half a time. And so here we see that the eagle, she's flying in, given the wings of the eagle, and the other constellation here we see is another bird, and another, the Pegasus after that, with wings also. So she's going through this period of flying into the wilderness. Okay, so we'll go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and select this here so we can follow Venus. Just one moment here. So if you recall what we said in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 6, "And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had the place prepared of God, that they should feed her there for 1,260 days." Okay, that's the same as 42 months, or times and a half a time, which means 3.5 years. in chapter 13 of Revelation, we pick up the story again, because now the serpent is cast down to the earth. And it says, and he opened up his mouth in order to send out a flood of water after the woman. Okay? And the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, whereby she might fly to her place prepared for her in the wilderness. I'll read it verbatim. It says in chapter 12, verse 14, it says, "And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for time, times, and half a time from the face of the serpent." So, what's her place where she's nourished for time, times, and a half a time, or 42 months, or 1260 days? Well, that starts when Mary and Joseph and Jesus flee at the time of the second appearance of the Star of Bethlehem in order to go into Egypt, where they're protected because Herod is trying to kill the Christ child. So what we see here in our constellations is we see Venus now given 2 wings of the great eagle, where she may fly to her place prepared in the wilderness. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this forward now from where we are on in our story. We're going to move this forward to the point in time where she's has a place prepared where she's protected for 3.5 years, which would be we already looked at earlier. It's the first year AD in the month of November, the 11th month, and the 2nd day. So this is where we see the wise men show up, and this is where her 1260-day period, her 42-month period, her 3.5-year period of fleeing from the face of the serpent, this is the place that was prepared in advance in heaven for her, that was foreordained for her. So we're flying in our story on the wings of eagles, and here's another eagle here for the women, okay? We're flying to her place now where she's got prepared to start her 1260 days of being fed in the wilderness, okay? So here we find Eve protected. We have Venus representing Eve and the cross here, and she is protected with the help of the cross and Mercury representing Jesus and so forth. And she's starting her 1260 day, time period of fleeing from the serpent. And then Herod, of course, as we saw earlier, sends out his soldiers to attack and slaughter all the innocents. And here, like the example we showed earlier of the blood pouring out of the side of the cross, out of the side of Jesus. So this is the start of her 42-month period. Okay, so now what I'd like to continue to read here is in verse 13, it says, or I'm sorry, not verse 13, chapter 13. It says in chapter 13, verse 1, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, its feet were the feet of a bear, its mouth was the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and his great authority." So let's take a look at our constellations here in the zodiac, okay? And so what we're going to see is if we look over here in the constellation of Cancer, here we have a beast that's rising up out of the sea, because that's a crab, right? Like a crab coming out of the shore of the ocean and the sands of the shore, and the crab comes up out of the waters. Okay, so the beasts, we have different beasts of the zodiac. This is all constellations of the zodiac. So this is a beast that rises up out of the sea, out of the waters on the shore, right? That's why he's standing on the sands of a shore. And it has the, according to the description here, the beast I saw was like unto a leopard. So here's your leopard, the lynx, okay? And his feet were like unto the feet of a bear. Okay, there's the feet of the bear, all right? And its mouth was like the mouth of a lion. Here's your mouth of a lion, okay? And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and his great authority. So here's the dragon that's underneath it as the seat of it, giving its power, seat, and great authority. So here is your beast of Revelation. And what we see in it is Saturn, okay? Normally, the constellation of Cancer has 6 stars in it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, but with the addition of Saturn, now we have 7 stars. All right, and so it's a beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon its 10 crowns, a name of blasphemy. Okay, so what we notice here is the crab Cancer has 10 claws. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so there's 10 horns, and upon his horn 10 crowns, and upon the heads the name of blasphemy. So the name of blasphemy, that's rather interesting too. These are pagan constellations and so forth. Like Saturn, for example, is a pagan god, right? In Hebrew, the actual name of this planet is Shabbati, which means the 7th planet, but in this case, they name it as Saturn. Now, what we're going to find is that Saturn actually spends 42 months, or 1,260 days, or 3.5 years in this sign of the beast, right? Going from the start here all the way past the head of the lion. It says the beast has the mouth of a lion. It doesn't give the whole body, just gives the mouth, right? So let's go ahead 42 months and watch Saturn as we progress along here, and you'll see that it remains in this beast sign the entire time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. Okay, so 42 months is the time frame it takes to traverse from the start of when it enters the beast sign all the way until it begins its journey completely out of it, past the head of the beast. So here's the 42-month period where it's in the beast sign. And we'll notice at the end of the 42 months, we have Mars here, representing the red beast, the scarlet-colored beast, if you will. And from this point on, Saturn would move forward out of the beast sign. So it says, continuing on with verse 2, it says, "And the beast I saw was like unto a leopard, its feet were the feet of the bear, the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave it his power and his seat and his great authority. And I saw one of the heads as were wounded unto death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast." Okay, so if we back up here, I'm going to go back to where we started here, just one second. Okay, so you remember, this is the start of the 42-month period. You remember there are 7 stars right now, with the addition of Saturn, that will make up the sign of the beast, okay? Normally it's 6 stars, but one of the stars, it says one of the heads was wounded and the deadly head wound was healed. So we're going to lose one of these stars somehow. So watch what happens with Saturn. Saturn does what planets do from time to time. They'll do a little loop-de-loop in their orbit, and then they'll come back again, and they'll do another loop-de-loop, and they'll come back again, okay? So Saturn is about to start a loop-de-loop. It's going to leave the constellation of Cancer, go into Gemini, but it's going to do loop-de-loop, and it's going to come back. So it's going to start out with 7 heads, but then it's going to lose one of its heads, and then that head is going to return again. So let's go ahead and watch that now. So we're going to go ahead and continue in time. We'll notice that Saturn is traveling backwards here. It's going to leave the constellation of Cancer, and it's going to continue on until it just basically comes in contact with the right arm of one of the Gemini twins here. And then from there, it's going to turn around once it reaches the arm, and it's going to go forward again and continue on until it comes to the constellation of Cancer. And then once it gets past its loop-de-loop, it enters back into Cancer, and now we have 7 heads again. So the deadly head wound is healed. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and stop this video because we're getting a little bit length in time here, and I'll pick it up again in another video in the future. But the point I wanted to make with this is that you can see that the Bible is prophetically true, and that the verses in it are actually confirmed in the astronomy in heaven, that God actually wrote out his prophecy in the stars. And so I wanted to do this video in order that you would see the validity of the Bible, and that is in fact a true thing, and God designed it, and his prophecies in his word are true as well, and that there is a God, that he's supernatural, and that Jesus Christ truly is the redemption for all humanity. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions, please like, comment, and subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you in future videos, and I will also do a part 2 that follows up on some of these topics as well. But you can also check out some of my other videos, including a greater detailed look at the Star of Bethlehem, and some of my other astronomy videos dealing with Revelation chapter 12, particularly the recent supposed sign of Revelation chapter 12 that occurred in 2017, and why I don't believe that that sign was accurate towards Bible prophecy. But again, please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you in future videos. Thanks.